You're looking at photographs from the Allied bombing campaigns of World War II. Dresden, Hamburg, Berlin, Tokyo. You see the rubble, the destruction, the human cost. You read about strategic targets, factories, railways, military installations. The textbooks tell you these were military necessities, tragic but necessary. Now forget everything you think you know about why those cities burned. Imagine you're holding a leather-bound ledger from the British Air Ministry, dated March 1943. The pages smell of cigarette smoke and old paper. You're reading target selection criteria, but buried in the bureaucratic language, past the references to industrial capacity and transportation hubs, you find something else. Architectural surveys, building inventories, specific structures marked for priority elimination, not factories, not barracks, cathedrals, opera houses, municipal buildings, libraries, and next to each in careful handwriting, pre-1850 construction, non-standard design, recommend complete destruction. You could call that coincidence. Military planners needed to be thorough. Buildings make good aiming points. Except these weren't the tallest buildings. They weren't the most strategically located. They were the oldest, the most ornate, the ones with domes that shouldn't exist and acoustics that violate known physics. This is the story of what they really bombed, and why certain architecture became more dangerous than any army. I found the ledger in 2019, not in some dramatic archive heist. I filled out forms, waited 3 weeks, and sat in a reading room in Kew, outside London, the Public Records Office. Everything properly catalogued, properly legal. I was researching civilian casualty patterns, expecting statistics and supply chain analyses. The document was misfiled. It should have been in Box 47, Section J, Operational Planning, Conventional Targets. Instead, it was in Box 34, Section F, Cultural Property Assessment. Someone had placed it there deliberately, or someone had tried to hide it poorly. Decades ago when the fear was fresh. The ledger was maybe 200 pages. Handwritten, typed it in DUMS, clipped in, marginalia in 3 different inks. Most of it was mundane. Town Hall, Lübeck, estimated civilian capacity, 400, structural integrity moderate, demolition difficulty low. Standard military assessment, but every 7th or 8th entry had a second section, secondary architectural survey, and these sections were different. Technical, obsessive, primary dome, 23.4 meters diameter, unsupported span, no evidence of internal framework, acoustic focal point calculated at 7.3 meters from center, generates 2.3 second reverb at 170 Hz. Construction date officially 1847. Masonry analysis suggests pre-1750. Technique inconsistent with period capabilities. I read that 3 times. Then I pulled out my phone. You're not supposed to, but the archivist had stepped away, and I photographed every page. My hands were shaking slightly, not from excitement, from the specific fear that comes when you realize you found something you weren't supposed to find. Why would military planners care about acoustic focal points? Why measure reverberation frequencies to 3 decimal places when deciding what to bomb? I spent 4 months cross-referencing those buildings with bombing records. Every single structure in that ledger with a secondary architectural survey. Bombed. Not just bombed, the kind of bombing where they came back 3 times to make sure nothing remained. The kind where official reports used phrases like complete erasure achieved and foundation-level destruction confirmed. And every single one of them was built before 1850. Every single one of them had architectural features that didn't make sense for their era. Domes too wide, acoustics too perfect, copper elements integrated into stone in ways that shouldn't have been possible with available technology. I sat in that reading room until closing. The archivist had to ask me twice to leave. I remember walking out into the spring evening, the light still golden, people walking dogs and pushing strollers. Normal life. And I kept thinking, they knew. The planners knew these buildings were different, and they destroyed them systematically while the world watched the war. Dresden, 1945. The city appears in the dawn light like something from a fever dream. February 13th. I'm piecing this together from survivor accounts, from the architectural surveys that preceded the raid by 3 weeks, from the meticulous German records kept even as their world burned. The Frauenkirche rises against the pale sky. The dome 25 meters in diameter, stone upon stone, no internal supports, completed in 1743. Official history says it was a marvel of Baroque engineering, George Baer's masterwork. Except Baer's own letters, the ones I found in a Leipzig archive, are full of confusion. The mathematics elude me. He wrote in 1728, I follow the marks already present in the foundation stones, though who carved them and when remains unknown to me. What marks? The letters don't say. The foundation stones don't exist anymore. They were specifically targeted in the bombings, third wave, ground penetration munitions, unusual for anti-civilian raids. You don't use those on normal buildings. You use them when you want to erase something at the root level. 3,000 feet above the city, Bombardier Lieutenant James Walsh sits in his Lancaster. I found his diary 40 years later, donated to the Imperial War Museum by his daughter. He's 23 years old. This is his 19th mission. He writes, "Briefing was different this morning. They showed us photographs, specific buildings marked in red. Not the railway yards, not the factories on the eastern edge. The church, with the big dome, the opera house, the Residenzschloss. Captain said these were architectural priorities, said the Germans were using them for unconventional purposes. We didn't ask what that meant. You learn not to ask." The first wave hits at 10:14 p.m. Incendiaries, creating the firestorm. Standard strategic bombing. But the second wave, arriving at 1:30 a.m., is different. Walsh writes, "We came in low. Could see the fires clearly, could see the dome of the Frauenkirche, still standing, lit up, orange. They vectored us specifically toward it. 3 runs. Making sure. I've bombed factories, rail yards, U-boat pens. Never seen them that focused on one civilian structure. The dome held for 2 passes, collapsed on the 3rd. Strangest thing, even through the flames I could hear it, a sound like singing, like a bell that size couldn't make. Frequency that made my teeth ache. Then silence when it fell. The official record says 25,000 died in Dresden. The architectural record says something else died too. I visited the reconstruction in 2018. They rebuilt the Frauenkirche. Finished in 2005. Exact dimensions, they claimed. Same materials. I brought acoustic equipment, a simple frequency analyzer, the kind architecture students use. The rebuilt dome looks identical. The measurements are precise. But the acoustic response is wrong. The original dome, according to pre-war measurements I found in a Saxony archive, had a resonant frequency of 170.46, 1 Hz. Perfect F below middle C. The acoustic focal point generated a 2.3-second natural reverb without any artificial enhancement. The rebuilt dome, 168.3 Hz, 1.7-second reverb. Close, but wrong. Like they copied the shape but missed something fundamental about how it worked. You could say that's normal variation. Old buildings settle. Measurements from the 1930s might have been imprecise. Except I found the same pattern in every rebuilt structure that replaced a destroyed Tartarian building. The dimensions match. The appearance convinces, but something invisible is missing. Something they either couldn't replicate or chose not to. What was the Frauenkirche actually doing? Why did Walsh hear it singing as it collapsed? And why would Allied command invest 3 separate bombing runs, thousands of pounds of ordnance, dozens of bomber crews at risk, to ensure one church dome ceased to exist? Königsberg, 1944. I'm tracing the pattern westward now. Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, Russia, RAF Bomber Command. 189 aircraft the target, officially, industrial infrastructure and communication nodes. The reality, according to mission reports I obtained through a Russian researcher who prefers to remain anonymous, complete destruction of historical city center, with special attention to cathedral complex and castle structures. The Königsberg Castle, built, officially, by the Teutonic Knights in 1255, expanded over centuries. A massive complex of towers, halls, and underground chambers. The walls contained copper channels running in geometric patterns, unexplained by any defensive or decorative purpose. The central tower had acoustic properties that made spoken words at the base audible at the top, 4 stories up, with perfect clarity. No speaking tubes, no mechanical amplification, just architecture that channeled sound in ways that shouldn't work. A German engineer, Friedrich Weber, studied the castle in 1938. His report to the Reich Cultural Ministry still exists. I found it referenced in an East German archive catalog, though the actual document was lost in transfer in 1963. But Weber's letter to his wife survived, sold at a Berlin estate sale. He writes, "Margarethe, I cannot explain what I have measured. The copper channels in the castle walls form a pattern not decorative, not structural. When I trace them with the magnetic field detector, they create a 3-dimensional grid extending through the entire building. At certain points, the magnetic reading drops to near 0. At others, it spikes to levels I've never recorded in any building. The pattern is mathematical, perfect angles, specific intervals, as if the building itself is some kind of instrument, though for what purpose I cannot fathom. I have requested more time to study this, but my superior says the military has other priorities. He seemed nervous when I showed him the readings. He said, "Some things are better left unmeasured, Weber. Some buildings have purposes we're not meant to understand." Weber died in 1944, not in the war, In his home, carbon monoxide poisoning ruled accidental. His research notes disappeared. His widow told her daughter, who told me in 2020, when she was 93 years old, that men came to the house 3 days after Friedrich's death. They wore civilian clothes but moved like military. They took every document, every photograph, every measurement he'd made. They told her it was for national security. They told her to forget her husband had ever studied the castle. The RAF destroyed Königsberg Castle over 4 nights of bombing. The first night collapsed the towers. The second night targeted the underground chambers, a peculiar focus for a military raid. The third night hit the foundation. The fourth night, they bombed the rubble. One pilot, in a letter home that his grandson shared with me, wrote, "We're bombing stones at this point, just stones. Orders are to ensure nothing recognizable remains." I asked the navigator why. He said he didn't know, but someone high up wants that castle erased from existence. The Soviets took Königsberg in 1945. They demolished what remained of the castle in 1968, using explosives usually reserved for deep mining. They built a house of Soviets on top, a brutalist concrete structure that never functioned properly. The foundation kept cracking. Walls developed fissures. The building was abandoned in 1985. Some say the ground beneath was unstable. Some say they built on something that shouldn't have been disturbed. I visited in 2021. The House of Soviets still stands, empty and slowly collapsing. You can't access the area where the castle stood. It's fenced off officially due to structural instability. But I talked to an old man who'd worked demolition on the castle site in 1968. His name was Dmitri. He was 17 then, part of the labor crew. We found chambers, he told me, sitting in his apartment with tea going cold between us. Deep chambers untouched by the bombs. Stone rooms with copper wire running through the walls, not like electrical wire, thicker, older. And at the center of the deepest chamber, a stone table. No, not a table. A platform, carved with lines and angles, mathematical patterns. Our foreman wouldn't let us photograph it, said orders were to fill the chambers with concrete, seal everything. They brought in special concrete mixed with something metallic. When we poured it, it hissed and steamed, even though the concrete was cold. We worked fast. Nobody wanted to be down there. The air felt wrong. Pressure on your ears, like descending in an airplane. When we finished, the foreman said, "Good, now we never speak of this." And we didn't, until now. I'm 89. What can they do to me now? What was beneath Königsberg Castle? Why did the Soviets 23 years after the war ended feel compelled to seal it with special concrete? And why did both the Nazis and the Allies seem equally desperate to ensure these structures were destroyed? Hamburg, 1943, the pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. July 24, 1943, Operation Gomorrah, RAF and USAF combined force. 791 aircraft beat the firestorm that consumed Hamburg, killed 42,000 people in one night. But before the firestorm, before the mass casualties, the first wave of bombers had specific instructions. I found them in USAF records, declassified in 1983, sitting in a cardboard box at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Target folder 47B. Michaelis Church, Priority Alpha. Ensure complete structural destruction. Foundation removal, authorized. St. Michaelis, Demichael to locals. Hamburg's most recognizable landmark. 132 meters tall, completed in 1786. The spire contained a bell platform, with 5 bells, the largest weighing 8.8 tons. But what made military planners mark it Priority Alpha? In the church archives evacuated before the bombing, held now in a climate-controlled vault in Lüneburg, there's a maintenance log from 1920. The entries are routine until August 14th. Unusual acoustic phenomenon reported during Sunday service. Bell 3 struck for morning call. Subsequent resonance continued for 47 seconds, significantly beyond normal decay time. Pitch remains stable at 170 Hz, despite bell oscillation ceasing. Father Klein reports parishioners experienced unusual sensation of pressure in chest during resonance. Bell technician Herb Braun called to investigate. Braun's investigation report, attached to the log. The bells are functioning within normal parameters. However, I have discovered something regular in the bell tower structure. The tower contains hollow copper channels, running from the bell platform down through the walls to the foundation. These channels are not part of any known bell hanging or acoustic design. When I traced them with a magnet, I found they connect to the copper roof elements, then descend to the foundation level. I attempted to measure their full extent but was denied access to the crypts by Father Klein, who stated that area was prohibited to lay investigation by church tradition. I advised that these copper elements may be creating unintended resonance effects, but I cannot explain the 47-second decay time. nor the uniform 170 Hz frequency, which should not be possible given the bell's size and material composition. Father Klein died in the bombing. Bronze records don't show what happened to him. The crypts were sealed by the firestorm, then deliberately filled with concrete during the post-war cleanup. The rebuilt St. Michaelis, completed in 1952, looks identical. Same height, same copper roof. But I found an interview with the architect, Ernst Friedrichs, published in a small Hamburg newspaper in 1975. We followed the original plans exactly, with one exception: the copper channels that ran through the original walls. They were not included in the reconstruction. The British engineering team that consulted on the project advised against them. They said the channels were structurally unnecessary and potentially problematic. They wouldn't elaborate. I was young then, eager to please. I followed their recommendation. Sometimes I wonder what we lost. What did they lose? I measured the rebuilt St. Michaelis in 2019. The bells sound beautiful, but they decay normally. 9 seconds for the largest bell, no extended resonance. Number 170 Hz stability, no chest pressure during services. I talked to a woman named Gerda Hartmann, age 97, who attended services at the original St. Michaelis as a child. We met in her nursing home in Hamburg. Her memory was sharp, her voice so sweet. The bells, she said, were different then. When they rang, you didn't just hear them, you felt them, in your bones, in your breathing. My mother said it was the voice of God. My father, who was an engineer, said it was architectural resonance. But I remember one Sunday. I was 7 or 8, the bells rang for longer than they should have. The sound kept going and going. People in the pews started looking at each other, confused. Some looked frightened. Father Klein stood up and raised his hand, and the sound stopped. Just like that. Cut off. He never explained it. After the war, after they rebuilt the church, I went back. The bells were beautiful, but they were just bells. They didn't sing the way the old ones did. The original St. Michaelis was hit by 32 bombs in the first hour of Operation Gomorrah. The spire collapsed. The bells fell. The copper channels melted in the firestorm. And in the morning when the smoke cleared, the ruins were still smoldering, with a heat that witnesses described as unnatural, like the stones themselves were burning. 3 cities so far. 3 structures with impossible acoustics. 3 priority targets marked for complete destruction. 3 buildings that all shared the same resonant frequency, 170 Hz. The same frequency Tesla experimented with. The same frequency that can create standing waves in human tissue. The same frequency that, according to some researchers, can interact with the Earth's natural Schumann resonance. You could still call this coincidence. 3 churches, acoustically interesting, destroyed in a war that destroyed everything. Except I'm just getting started. And the pattern extends far beyond 3 cities. Lübeck, 1942. Let me take you north. March 28, 1942. RAF Bomber Command's first use of a new tactic, area bombing. Lübeck was the test case. The official reason: medieval timber construction makes ideal target for incendiary bombing tests. The real reason sits in a different file, one I found referenced in an Air Ministry memo but couldn't locate the actual document. Listed as missing, probable destruction during 1950s archive reorganization. But the memo, dated March 12, 1942, survives. Lübeck survey confirms presence of 7 structures matching profile parameters, architectural characteristics consistent with previous identifications. Recommend testing of incendiary effectiveness against this construction type. Cultural value noted, but deemed secondary to experimental objectives. 7 structures. I spent 3 weeks in Lübeck in 2020, cross-referencing pre-war architectural surveys with bombing damage maps. I found them. The Marienkirche, the Rathhaus, the Heiligengeist Hospital, the Dom, the Egedienkirche, the Jakobikirche, St. Catherine's Church, all built between 1250 and 1350, officially, all containing architectural elements that make no sense for their supposed construction dates. The Marienkirche had the most complete pre-war documentation. A German architectural student, Hans Miller, did his thesis on the church's acoustics. In 1929, his paper still exists in the University of Lübeck archives. He measured the reverberation time at 7.3 seconds, extraordinary for a church that size. He documented copper elements embedded in the walls, forming geometric patterns he couldn't explain. And he noted something that troubled him deeply. The acoustic response of the Marienkirche cannot be explained by its architectural form alone. I have measured 40 churches of similar size and construction. None exhibit the same properties: the sustained resonance, the frequency stability, the spatial distribution of sound. These suggest intentional acoustic engineering far beyond medieval capabilities. Most puzzling is the focal point beneath the main dome, where multiple frequency bands converge with mathematical precision. Standing at this point, one experiences auditory phenomena I can only describe as disorienting, a sense of sound coming from inside one's own head rather than from external sources. Father Schmidt, who has served this church for 30 years, tells me this spot is avoided by the clergy. It makes prayer difficult, he said. Your own thoughts become too loud. The RAF burned the Marienkirche to its foundation. 2 pilots' accounts from that raid survive in different archives. Flight Lieutenant William Bradford, in his official report, Marienkirche observed destroyed at 0247 hours, structural collapse confirmed. Intense fire observed at foundation level, unusual given stone construction. And in Bradford's personal diary, discovered by his grandson and shared with me, the church burned wrong. Stone doesn't burn like that. And when the roof collapsed, I swear, I heard something. A low note, vibrating through the plane. The navigator heard it too, asked if I'd heard the sound. We didn't discuss it. But that night, back at base, I couldn't sleep, kept hearing that note, deep and sustained, like the church was screaming as it died. I found Muller's fate in a University of Lübeck casualty list. He died in 1943, killed in an air raid on Hamburg. But before he died, he tried to publish his thesis findings. I found a rejection letter from the journal Architectural Acoustics, dated 1930. While your measurements are intriguing, your conclusions about intentional acoustic engineering in medieval structures are speculative and potentially inflammatory. We recommend you revise your interpretation to emphasize natural acoustic properties arising from construction methods, rather than suggesting deliberate design beyond medieval knowledge. We cannot publish claims that imply medieval builders possessed acoustic understanding comparable to modern engineering without more substantial evidence. Muller didn't revise it. He submitted it to 2 other journals. Both rejected it with similar language. His thesis sat in the university archives, gathering dust, until I found it. His measurements are precise, his conclusions careful, but he touched something that made academic gatekeepers nervous. I visited the rebuilt Marienkirche. Reconstruction was completed in 1982. The architecture is faithful to the original, but I brought acoustic equipment again. The reverberation time, 3.9 seconds. The copper elements in the walls, not replicated. Structural engineers advised against them. Modern materials made them unnecessary. The focal point beneath the dome? Gone. No disorienting auditory phenomena. No sense of thought amplification. Just a beautiful church, empty of whatever made it special. I stood in that rebuilt space for an hour, measuring, remeasuring. A priest approached me, curious about my equipment. I asked him if he knew about the original church's acoustics, about Muller's research. The war destroyed much. We rebuilt what we could, but some things cannot be reconstructed. Perhaps they were never meant to be. Perhaps they were never allowed to be. 4 cities now, 8 structures, all marked for destruction, all exhibiting the same impossible properties, all sharing elements that shouldn't exist in their time periods. Acoustic engineering beyond medieval capabilities, copper elements with no apparent purpose, resonant frequencies that match precisely across hundreds of miles, and hundreds of years of supposed construction. The bombing of Lübeck was called a success. A test of new tactics, the firestorm, proved that medieval city centers could be efficiently destroyed. Other raids followed. Rostock, Cologne, Essen. Each time, I've traced the same pattern. Among the military targets, among the factories and rail yards, certain buildings received special attention. Priority targets, complete destruction required. Buildings that sang at 170 hertz. Buildings with copper veins. Buildings that seemed to remember something the world was meant to forget. Berlin, 1945. By the time I reached Berlin in my research, I thought I understood the pattern. Old structures, impossible acoustics, systematic destruction. But Berlin complicated everything, because in Berlin, they tried to hide what they were hiding. The Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church, built 189-5, much later than the medieval structures, but incorporating architectural elements salvaged from an earlier church that stood on the same site since 1480. The original edifice was damaged in an 1889 fire. During reconstruction, architects discovered something beneath the foundation, a stone chamber predating any documented construction. The chamber was sealed, its existence noted only in a maintenance log I found in the Evangelical Church archives. Foundation work suspended due to discovery of substructure, age indeterminate. Building commission advises sealing and continued construction without disturbance. The church incorporated elements from that earlier structure, stones, copper fixtures, foundation elements, and when it was completed, it exhibited the same impossible acoustics. A 1923 acoustic study conducted by the Berlin Technical University, measured reverberation times of 6.8 seconds, and noted an anomalous frequency response at 170 Hz, suggesting unidentified resonant structure. The British bombed the church on November 23, 1943. Then again on January 29, 1944, the second raid used a new type of bomb, deep penetration ordnance, designed for bunker busting, unusual for a church. The official explanation: the church's tower was being used as a spotting position for anti-aircraft guns, but I found a different explanation in an unexpected place: a letter written in 1946 by a British intelligence officer named Charles Pemberton to his sister. The letter was sold at auction in 2015. A collector bought it, scanned it, uploaded it to a World War Documents database. I found it while searching for anything related to architectural targeting. Pemberton wrote, "Dear Margaret, I can finally speak of things that troubled me during the war. I was assigned to target assessment, reviewing bomb damage reports, verifying that priority structures had been adequately destroyed. We had a list, buildings across Germany that required confirmation of complete elimination. No exceptions, no survival permitted. I asked my superior why a church would be on the same list as U-boat pens and munitions factories. He showed me photographs. Pre-war, the church had been studied, measured, mapped. He said, 'These structures are not what they appear. They are remnants of a technology we don't understand, incorporated into buildings by architects who didn't know what they were working with. The Germans have been studying them. We cannot allow that knowledge to fall into any hands, ours or theirs. Better that it not exist.' I asked what technology. He said, 'Acoustic resonance, Margaret, frequency control, the ability to influence human physiology through architectural sound. Imagine a building that could calm a population or incite them. Imagine architecture as a weapon.' These old structures, they weren't churches first. They were repurposed, built over, built around, incorporated into something that seemed innocent. We're tearing them out like tumors before they metastasize. I think about that conversation often. I think about what we destroyed, and I wonder if we were right. The Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church was partially preserved as a ruin after the war, a memorial to the bombing. But the foundation, the crypts, the chamber beneath, sealed with concrete in 1948, access prohibited. To this day, the lower levels are closed, listed as structurally unsound. I tried to get permission to measure them in 2020. My request was denied by the church administration. No explanation given. But I found someone who'd been down there, a construction worker named Klaus Zimmermann, now 83, who'd worked on stabilization efforts in 1963. We met in a cafe in former East Berlin. His hands shook as he stirred sugar into coffee that had gone cold. They didn't want us down there, he said. But the foundation was cracking, threatening the ruins above. So they sent us in. 20 meters down, we found it. A chamber, roughly circular, maybe 15 meters diameter. The walls were covered with copper, not pipes, not wire, but sheets of copper, formed into patterns, geometric, mathematical. And in the center, a raised platform, stone, carved with lines and channels. We were told not to touch anything, just stabilize the modern concrete around it and leave. But I touched it, just once. Put my hand on the platform. It was cold, colder than it should have been, and I felt vibration. Not sound, vibration, in my bones, in my teeth, like standing next to machinery that wasn't running but was somehow still on. I pulled my hand back. My fingers tingled for hours afterward. We sealed that chamber tight, concrete, steel reinforcement, buried it forever. The foreman said, "Good. Let the past stay buried." But I've thought about that chamber every day since. What was it? Who built it? And why did it feel alive? Berlin held dozens of these structures. The Berliner Dom, the Neue Synagogue, the Marienkirche, all bombed, all containing architectural elements that predated their official construction, all exhibiting acoustic properties that shouldn't exist, and all systematically destroyed in raids that seemed to prioritize cultural structures over military targets. Dresden gets remembered because of the scale of death, but Berlin's architectural destruction was more surgical, more intentional, building by building, chamber by chamber, erasing a network that someone decades earlier had buried beneath the city like a nervous system. I mapped every church bombed in Berlin, overlaid them on a map of the city. The pattern was unmistakable. They formed a geometric web, each structure positioned at specific intervals from the others, not clustered randomly like normal urban growth, arranged, pose-imaged, like nodes in a network that no longer exists, bombed during the war, sealed after it, hidden beneath the rebuilt city. What was that network for? Who built it? And why did both Nazis and Allies agree it had to be destroyed? Nuremberg, 1945. The pattern extends south. January 2, 1945. RAF and USAF joint operation. Nuremberg. Medieval city center, the Altstadt. 1,800 buildings, destroyed in one night. Officially, industrial targets, the Siemens factories, the marshalling yards. But I found something in the Bavarian State Archives that tells a different story. A memo from the SS Cultural Heritage Division, dated December 1944, evacuation of research materials from Nuremberg complete. Analysis teams withdrawn. Recommend structure elimination before Allied advance to prevent capture of sites. Asset denial is priority. What research materials, what sites? The St. Lorenz Church. Construction officially began in 1270, but the foundation stones, when examined by archaeologists in 1938, contained tool marks that didn't match any medieval techniques. The stone was harder than it should be. Analysis showed a crystalline structure suggesting exposure to extreme heat during formation, inconsistent with any known quarrying method. The church had something else. In the crypts, there was a chamber, documented in church records, from 1650 but clearly much older. The chamber contained a spring. Not unusual. Many medieval churches were built on water sources. But this spring had a peculiarity noted in a 1742 maintenance log. The water in the crypt chamber flows upward against gravity. Natural philosophers consulted. No explanation provided. Water flowing upward. In 1938, a team from the Annenberg, the Nazi archaeological organization, studied the chamber. Their report, fragments of which survived in captured documents, described an anomalous hydrological phenomenon. Water emerging from floor aperture appears to flow upward approximately 30 centimeters before descending naturally. Magnetic measurements around aperture show fluctuation pattern consistent with text missing. Acoustic properties of chambers suggest resonant design. Frequency response peaks at 170 Hz. Further study authorized to determine technological application. The Annenberg team was still there when the SS evacuation order came in December 1944. They took their equipment, their notes, their samples. They sealed the chamber, and 2 weeks later, Allied bombers destroyed St. Lorenz Church with precision that reduced the medieval structure to rubble. The crypts were buried. The chamber was lost. The water that flowed upward stopped flowing at all. I spoke with a historian in Nuremberg, Dr. Sabine Fischer, who specializes in the city's wartime history. She showed me something interesting. Bombing mission reports from January 2, 1945. The weather was terrible that day, she explained. Heavy cloud cover. Visibility minimal. Most raids were canceled across the theater. But Nuremberg went ahead. Why? The targets they hit weren't critical infrastructure. The marshalling yards were secondary targets. The primary bombing pattern centered on the Altstadt, the oldest part of the city. Historical churches, guild halls, the oldest municipal buildings. They bombed through clouds, using dead reckoning, hitting structures they'd carefully mapped in previous reconnaissance. That level of determination, in that weather for cultural targets, it doesn't fit standard strategic bombing doctrine. I asked if she'd encountered evidence of special targeting priorities. She hesitated, then she pulled out a folder. This is off the record. I found this in a collection of documents sold by a British veteran's estate, a target assessment sheet from January 1, 1945. It lists St. Lorenz Church as priority alpha, foundation elimination required. Not destroy, not damage, eliminate. The foundation. That's not anti-infrastructure language, that's erasure language. The rebuilt St. Mindicity, Lorenz, completed in 1952, is beautiful. Gothic architecture faithfully restored, but the crypts remain sealed. The foundation was excavated during reconstruction, and then immediately filled with concrete. The official explanation, structural instability and water damage made lower-level restoration impossible. But I found a photograph taken in 1950 during the excavation. It shows the crypt chamber before it was sealed. The floor is broken rubble. And in the center, where the spring should have been, there's a hole, roughly circular, maybe 2 meters across, and around it, clearly visible in the photograph, copper channels running through the broken stone. The same copper channels I'd seen described in Hamburg, in Königsberg. In every one of these structures, the photograph is labeled on the back, in handwritten German. Crypt foundation, St. Lorenz. Note copper conduit system. Immediate sealing authorized per Allied Reconstruction Commission directive. Allied Reconstruction Commission. Not German authorities. Allied authorities ordered the sealing after the war, after Germany was defeated. Why would Allied authorities care about a broken medieval foundation, unless what was beneath St. Lorenz was still considered dangerous, even in ruins? Even after the war ended. Munich, 1944. The list keeps growing. July 13th, 1944. Munich. The Frauenkirche, Twin Towers. Red brick. Completed in 1488. Iconic. The symbol of the city. But like everything else in this investigation, the official history hides complications. The towers are 98.57 meters tall. Exactly, both of them. That precision troubled Bavarian architect Johann Schmidt when he surveyed them in 1893. He published a monograph noting, "The symmetry of the Frauenkirche towers exceeds any reasonable construction tolerance." Medieval builders working with the tools available in the 15th century could not have achieved such precision. The variation between the two towers is less than 3 centimeters across 98 meters of height. Modern construction, with steel and surveying equipment, struggles to achieve such accuracy. The foundations alone suggest engineering sophistication beyond the period's capabilities. Schmidt's monograph was not well received. Academic criticism was harsh. He was accused of misunderstanding medieval craftsmanship. His career stalled. He died in 1901, his theories dismissed. But in 1938, someone read Schmidt's work with interest. A Nazi architecture team surveyed the Frauenkirche, taking detailed measurements, ground-penetrating surveys, acoustic analysis. Their report, which I found referenced in a 1946 Allied intelligence summary, concluded, the Frauenkirche towers function as architectural resonators. The brick construction contains copper elements, forming a vertical network through both towers. When sound of appropriate frequency is introduced at the base, the towers amplify and project it across the city. The phenomenon is measurable and repeatable. The towers were not designed as bell towers. They were designed as broadcast towers. For what purpose, we cannot determine. Broadcast towers. Broadcasting what? Sound at 170 Hz? The Frauenkirche was bombed on July 13, 1944, during a raid that officially targeted Munich's railway infrastructure. But the bombing pattern shows something different. The Frauenkirche received direct hits, 7 high-explosive bombs, enough to bring down one tower completely and damage the second severely. The reconstruction report from 1953 notes that the tower foundations were too damaged to salvage, too damaged, or too dangerous to leave intact. I met with a retired engineer, Hermann Wolf, who worked on the Frauenkirche reconstruction. He's 91 now, living in a care facility in Bavaria. His memory is sharp. "We didn't understand what we were removing," he told me. "The old foundations had these channels, copper, mostly, running deep into the ground. We were told to excavate them completely, remove all copper, replace with modern materials." I asked the project lead why. He said the copper had corroded, was structurally compromised, but it didn't look corroded. It looked intentional, like plumbing, but not for water, for something else. We pulled out maybe 2 tons of copper from beneath those towers. All of it was melted down. All of it disappeared into scrap. I kept one piece, small, maybe 10 centimeters. I wanted to remember, to have proof. He showed me the copper fragment. It was formed into a specific curve, precise and deliberate. One side was smooth. The other had raised patterns, geometric, mathematical. "I've shown this to metallurgists," Wolf said. "They can't date it. The copper is too pure, no modern impurities. But the forming technique suggests industrial manufacturing. This shouldn't exist in a structure from 1488. It couldn't exist. But here it is, in my hand. Real, the rebuilt Frauenkirche towers are the same height, 98.57 meters, matching the original. But the acoustic properties are different. A 2010 study by the Technical University of Munich measured the tower's acoustic response. Normal, predictable, nothing anomalous. No amplification effect, no broadcast capability. Just towers, holding bells, looking like they always did, but functionally dead. Munich was one of the most heavily bombed cities in Germany. 74 air raids, but certain structures received disproportionate attention. The Frauenkirche, the Theaterkirche, the Assam Church, all medieval or early modern, all containing architectural elements that suggested purposes beyond worship, all systematically destroyed, their foundations excavated, their copper elements removed and disappeared. 7 cities now. Dozens of structures. A pattern so consistent, it cannot be coincidence. Buildings across Germany, built in different centuries by different cultures in different architectural styles, all sharing the same hidden characteristics, all targeted for complete destruction in a war that supposedly was about defeating Nazis, not erasing architecture. The map of bombed structures forms a network. When I overlay them on a map of Germany, they're not randomly distributed. They follow ley lines, ancient trackways, geological features, magnetic anomalies, as if whoever built the original structures, whoever integrated these copper systems into medieval churches, was following an older map, a template, a design that predated Christianity, predated Germany, predated recorded history, a design that someone in 1943 decided had to be destroyed, completely, at any cost. I've spent 3 years on this investigation. 3 years cross-referencing bombing records with architectural surveys, casualty reports with acoustic measurements, official histories with private letters and buried photographs. 3 years interviewing survivors who remember the old buildings, engineers who demolished the ruins, researchers who measured what remains. The pattern is undeniable. The suppression is ongoing. In 2021, I submitted a research proposal to the German Federal Archives, requesting access to complete wartime targeting documents for cultural sites. Request denied. Documents remain classified for national security purposes. In 2022, I requested permission to conduct ground-penetrating surveys at 3 sealed church foundations in Berlin. Permission denied by church authorities. Sites are structurally unstable and prohibited for safety reasons. In 2023, I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the UK National Archives for complete architectural assessment files from Bomber Command. Request denied. Documents subject to ongoing 100-year classification under national security exemption. Why are documents about buildings bombed 80 years ago still classified? What national security interest is served by hiding architectural surveys of destroyed churches? Who is still protecting this secret? And why? The structures are gone. The copper networks are excavated. The chambers are sealed. The acoustic properties are erased. The technology, whatever it was, is lost. So why maintain secrecy? Unless it's not completely lost. Unless fragments remain. Unless someone, somewhere, is still studying what was buried beneath those medieval churches, still trying to understand what the Tartarians built, still trying to replicate what the bombs destroyed. Or unless the secrecy itself is the point, keep asking questions, and you encounter walls. Official walls, bureaucratic walls, the kind of walls that suggest you're getting close to something true. I think about Charles Pemberton's letter. Better that it not exist. The British intelligence officer, who said they were tearing out knowledge like tumors before they metastasize. What knowledge? Acoustic resonance, frequency control, the ability to influence human physiology through architectural sound. Every destroyed structure in this investigation shared that 170 Hz frequency, the same frequency Tesla experimented with, the same frequency that in laboratory conditions can create standing waves in human tissue, influence heart rhythms, alter brainwave patterns. The same frequency that some researchers suggest was used in ancient temples to induce altered states of consciousness. Imagine a network of structures, built across Europe, all tuned to the same frequency, all capable of broadcasting that frequency across cities, all positioned at specific geographic points to create, what? A continental resonance field? A system for influencing populations, a technology for harmonizing human consciousness across thousands of miles. It sounds like science fiction, except the evidence is physical, the measurements are precise, the structures were real. And someone bombed them systematically while the world was distracted by war. Vienna, 1945. I need to show you one more city. Vienna, March 12, 1945. USAF daylight raid. St. Stephen's Cathedral, Stephansdom. The heart of Vienna. Built starting in 1137, expanded over centuries, the South Tower, completed in 1433, is 136.4 meters tall. The tower contained 13 bells. The largest, the Pomeran, weighed 20,130 kilograms, cast in 1711. When it rang, people reported feeling the sound in their chests from a kilometer away, but it was the smaller bells, the ones in the North Tower, that interested the researchers. A Viennese physicist, Dr. Anton Webern, studied Stephansdom's acoustics in 1936. His paper, published in a small Austrian journal, described anomalous acoustic coupling between the North and South Towers. When bells in the North Tower are rung, sympathetic vibration occurs in the South Tower at amplitudes exceeding expected resonant transfer. The coupling appears to be mediated through the cathedral structure itself, as if the building functions as a single acoustic instrument. Weber noted something else: copper strips embedded in the cathedral walls, running from the bell towers down into the crypts. These elements appear to be neither structural nor decorative. Their purpose is unclear. However, when electromagnetic measurements are taken near these copper elements during bell ringing, anomalous readings are recorded, magnetic field fluctuations that correlate with acoustic frequency. The cathedral appears to be converting sound into electromagnetic phenomenon, or vice versa. This should not be possible with passive architectural elements. Weber's paper attracted attention from the Reich Research Council. In 1938, after the Anschluss, an Ahnenerbe team arrived in Vienna. They spent 6 months studying Stephansdom. Their findings, according to a summary I found in captured Nazi documents, concluded: the cathedral represents the most complete surviving example of architectural resonance engineering. The building is not merely a church, but a functional device for sound amplification and electromagnetic field generation. The crypts contain chambers with copper-lined walls and carved stone platforms. These chambers, when acoustically activated, generate measurable electromagnetic effects. Practical applications require further study. The team was withdrawn in 1944 as the Soviets advanced. Their equipment was evacuated. Their research went with them. And then, in March 1945, American bombers hit Vienna. Stephansdom was struck by bombs and severely damaged. The wooden roof caught fire. The Pommern bell fell and shattered. Much of the interior was destroyed. But here's what's strange. Vienna's industrial targets, the oil refineries, the Floridsdorf refinery that supplied fuel to the Wehrmacht, received moderate damage, repairable damage. But Stephansdom, specific targeting, multiple direct hits, the crypts were collapsed. The copper elements were destroyed in the fires that raged for 2 days. I found a statement from the bombardier, Lieutenant Frank Morrison, interviewed in 1978 for a war history project. We weren't supposed to hit cultural targets. Orders were to focus on oil infrastructure. But someone high up changed the target package last minute. I remember the navigator arguing about it. He said hitting a cathedral was bad optics. The majors shut him down, said this wasn't about optics, said there were technical installations in the cathedral. We didn't know what that meant. We followed orders, technical installations. In a medieval cathedral, the Soviets took Vienna. In April 1945, they immediately secured Stephansdom. Soviet engineers surveyed the damage, and then, according to Austrian witnesses, they spent 3 weeks excavating the crypts, not recovering bodies, not salvaging art, excavating, removing something. Trucks came and went. Whatever they found was loaded and taken east. It never came back. The Austrians were allowed to begin reconstruction in 1948. But the crypts, sealed, filled with concrete, access prohibited. The official explanation, structural instability and war damage, made lower-level preservation impossible. The rebuilt Stephansdom is magnificent. The bells were recast. The Pommern was rebuilt, even larger than the original. It rings beautifully. But when I measured the cathedral's acoustic response in 2022, there was no anomalous coupling between the towers. No excessive sympathetic vibration, no electromagnetic fluctuations near the walls. The copper strips were not replicated. Modern structural engineering made them unnecessary. I interviewed Dr. Elisabeth Kraus, an Austrian architectural historian who studied pre-war Stephansdom documentation. She showed me photographs from the 1930s, images of the crypts before the war. In one photograph, visible on the crypt walls were copper sheets formed into geometric patterns. In another, a stone platform with carved channels radiating from a central point. These chambers were known to church officials, Dr. Kraus explained. But their purpose was never officially explained. Parish records from the 18th century mention them as the old works and warn that only authorized persons should enter, as the effects can be disturbing. What effects? The records don't elaborate, but it's clear these chambers were considered special, different. After the war, when reconstruction began, there was a debate about whether to preserve the crypts. The decision was made at the highest levels by the Allied occupation authorities, not by Austrian officials. The chambers were to be sealed permanently, no discussion. Why would occupation authorities care about medieval crypts? I think about Dr. Webern's measurements. Sound converting to electromagnetic fields. The cathedral functioning as a device. What kind of device? For what purpose? And I think about the systematic destruction, not just bombs, but follow-up, excavation, removal, sealing. The pattern repeated across every major city I've investigated, as if the war was cover for something else. A continent-wide elimination campaign, targeting knowledge buried in stone and copper, erasing a technology that predated nations, predated war, predated the modern world. A technology that someone feared enough to destroy during the most destructive war in human history. The evidence fills filing cabinets now. Thousands of pages, photographs, documents, measurements, testimonies. The map on my wall shows 47 structures across Germany and Austria, all bombed, all exhibiting the same architectural characteristics, all targeted with precision that suggests they were more important than military installations. I can show you the acoustic measurements, the resonant frequency appearing again and again, 170 Hz, exactly, across hundreds of miles, across hundreds of years of supposed construction. I can show you the copper networks, identical patterns in churches that were supposedly built independently by different architects in different centuries. Geometric, mathematical, purposeful. I can show you the bombing records, priority targets, foundation elimination, complete destruction required. Language that makes no sense for cultural structures. Language that makes perfect sense If you're trying to erase technology, I can show you the suppression. Documents classified for 100 years. FOIA request rejected. Research proposals declined. The walls that appear when you ask the right questions. But I can't show you what these structures actually did, what they were built for, what technology they represent, because that knowledge was destroyed, systematically, deliberately, while the world watched the Holocaust and the death camps and thought they knew what the war was about. There was another war happening, invisible, against architecture, against knowledge, against a network of structures that someone, long ago, built for purposes we've forgotten. And in 1943, someone remembered, someone understood, and someone decided that knowledge was too dangerous to survive. Who made that decision? Why? And what are they still protecting? The structures are gone, but the questions remain, and somewhere in a classified archive, in a vault beneath a government building, I believe the answers exist. The complete surveys, the full measurements, the research that explained what these buildings actually were. Until those documents are declassified, all I have is the evidence that survives. The fragments, the testimonies of the old men and women who remember when bells rang differently, the photographs of copper networks ripped out of foundations, the maps showing geometric patterns that shouldn't exist by accident, and the certainty that we bombed something during World War II that wasn't about defeating fascism. We bombed history. We bombed structures that connected us to something ancient and forgotten. The war ended in 1945, but the suppression continues. The crypts stay sealed, the documents stay classified, and the rebuilt churches ring with bells that sound beautiful but ordinary. Whatever they used to be, we've forgotten, or been made to forget. Maybe that's the point. Maybe forgetting was always the objective. Bomb the stones, seal the chambers. Let time and reconstruction finish what high explosives started. But some things resist forgetting. Old men remember strange sounds. Engineers keep copper fragments they shouldn't have. Photographers survive in estate sales, and investigators like me keep asking questions that someone hoped would stop being asked. The buildings are gone, but they left traces. In documents, in measurements, in the gaps where answers should be. And maybe that's enough. Maybe knowing something was erased is the first step toward understanding what it was. Maybe the systematic nature of the destruction proves the importance of what was destroyed. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these were just churches, just old buildings with interesting acoustics, casualties of war, nothing more, demolished for strategic reasons that made sense at the time, rebuilt with modern materials because progress is inevitable, sealed because foundations were unstable and secrets are just shadows. But I don't think so. I've seen too much. The pattern is too consistent. The suppression is too active. And the fear that leaks out of letters and testimonies, the fear that made engineers bury chambers with special concrete, the fear that keeps documents classified 80 years later, that fear is too real. Whatever these structures were, someone is still afraid of them. Afraid of what they represented, afraid of what they might reveal, afraid that if we look closely enough, measure precisely enough, ask persistently enough, we might remember what we were made to forget. I'm going to keep looking, keep measuring, keep asking, and maybe, eventually, someone will answer, or maybe the stones themselves will speak. In frequencies we've learned not to hear, in patterns we've learned not to see, in histories we've learned not to believe. The war ended, the buildings fell, but the mystery remains, and mysteries, I've learned, have a way of resisting even the most systematic erasure. The truth is buried, but not gone, not yet.